right. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for today's event. My name is Leah Charpentier, and I head government affairs for Europe for First Solar, which is an American company that produces solar panels. As such, I'm delighted to host today's discussion on the Green Deal. I'm a member of AmChem's board, which is why I get to be today's master of ceremony. Just to kind of set the scene for today's discussion, and I will be brief because I can't wait to get to our speakers, but the batteries regulation is a really interesting test case for the Green Deal agenda. I mean, you realize with the batteries regulation how much the Green Deal agenda is cutting across a lot of different fields of EU policymaking, whether it's industrial policy, whether it's the oh so thorny discussion of strategic autonomy, and, you know, as prosaically as it seems, product policy, which is where really the regulation comes in, keeping on top of it all of these questions of traceability, of social responsibility. So you really are, in a way, in a law that's going to be precedent setting for everything that comes next with the Green Deal agenda. And that's why I'm absolutely delighted to host today's discussion and hope that we're going to have very effective Q&A throughout. So without taking any more of your time, I'm going to hand over to today's moderator, Silke Conrad from Daimler. Silke, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Very nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here this morning. I think this is a very timely and conference to have, and I'm very happy to have all these great speakers today. So today we will have Thelma Branco, who is Environment Attaché from the Perm Rep of Portugal. We have Ewart Deurwaarde from DG Grow, who is responsible for the batteries and eco-design. Vasilis Rizos, Head of Sustainable Resource Circular Economy at CEPS. And from industry, from 3M, we have Emilia, who will give an industry point of view. So I'm not going to stay too much on the introduction, and I would like hand over to Thelma, who will have a short presentation on the council point of view. So please, Thelma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Silke, and thank you as well to the American Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to the Portuguese presidency to take part in this event on charging up the European Green Deal and addressing in particular the case of the batteries proposal. It is my pleasure to attend it on behalf of the Portuguese presidency and the Portuguese permanent representation to the EU, and to address the work that has been ongoing in the Council during the Portuguese presidency. I would start following up on the initial remarks by Leah and complementing the American Chamber, because the topic of the event reflects precisely the context in which we tackled the proposed regulation in the framework of the Portuguese presidency, which was presented, as you know, last year by the Commission. And I would start by briefly saying a few words about the context in which we are working. For your information and for your background, the motto of the Portuguese presidency during the current semester has been a time for deliver for a fair, green and digital recovery, under which we have identified 5 key priorities: a resilient, social, green, digital and global Europe. And Portugal took the presidency at a time for key time for the implementation of the European Green Deal, as we are dealing in the Council for the first time with the first initial legislative proposals that the Commission has presented in this context, as is the case of the batteries regulation. As a broader priority, excuse me, my phone was ringing. As a broader priority, we have set as one of our goals to mobilize the member states to the implementation of the Green Deal and behind the European Green Deal, aiming at promoting an innovative and resilient carbon neutral development model, which will ensure that climate policy and the goal of carbon neutrality are fully integrated into the several various sectoral policies. And due in fact to its innovative, comprehensive and full life cycle approach, the proposal for the batteries regulation contains in itself all these dimensions, which are at the core of the Portuguese presidency and of course at the core of the European Green Deal. It is a key piece of legislation of strategic importance for sustainable mobility and climate neutrality objectives, as well as for the impact it can have to strengthen competitiveness and sustainability across the worldwide battery value chain. It is also the first legislative proposal to be presented in follow-up to the Circular Economy Action Plan, and for all these reasons, as Leah and Silke have mentioned, is being followed with particular attention, we are aware, by all stakeholders. Since the beginning of the semester, the Portuguese presidency has been committed to advancing as much as possible in the negotiation of the batteries proposal. We have been keeping an intense rhythm of discussions in the Council, but this is, as we all know, a proposal which is technically complex with an innovative dimension to it and with a very large scope. Therefore, its negotiations required, of course, sufficient time. An initial orientation debate took place in an informal video conference of the environment ministers on March 18, under already the Portuguese presidency. And on that occasion, the debate focused on the legal basis of the proposal and its scope, the sustainability and safety requirements, provisions on supply chain due diligence, and end-of-life management of batteries. At that time, ministers welcomed the proposal, highlighted its innovative and ambitious nature, and the importance of the EU having a future-proof legal framework on batteries, so that the decarbonization objectives can be reached while also ensuring sustainability across the batteries through their life cycle. The discussions have since continued at the technical level at the Working Party on Environment, and we have been focusing mostly on the sustainability and safety requirements and also on the end-of-life management of batteries. We are now fast approaching the end of the Portuguese presidency. We have 1 month to go still, and we count on presenting a progress report of the work done so far at the Environment Council taking place on the 10th of June. We will then, at that occasion, highlight the main issues that the presidency considers still require further consideration on the future work. We will then, of course, pass on the file to the good hands of the incoming Slovenian presidency, which will take the presidency starting from July. As I mentioned, this is indeed a complex and broad proposal, and the co-legislators, in cooperation with the Commission, as we have been doing so far, still have to have an intense and detailed work and a careful analysis of the text, which I guess, and I would say, is a testimony to the importance of this piece of legislation. I thank once again the American Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to take part in this invitation. I hope this the state of play of the negotiations at the Council level have been useful for participants, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion today at your event.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction. I think you mentioned a lot of points that we actually discussed also within our working group already, which is some of the things like the complexity, climate neutrality, the goal of the battery will be part of the industrial policy as well, to move forward or to push it, Europe being part of more of a global supply chain of batteries. I think all of these issues are, important for us. So I would like to start off with some questions for all panelists. I think one thing that we all recognized in the proposal is, first of all, of course, the importance, but one thing that is really struck us was the high amount of delegated acts that are included in the proposal. So this is not only a challenge for industry, but also a challenge for all stakeholders on the political level. So my question is, how are we going to tackle these delegated acts, which some of them are quite technical and will require some intensive work from industry and also input from industry. I'm just naming carbon footprint, which is a very important one, also on the durability requirements. So I would like to hear some of your views on that, on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you,
Who would like to
Silke.
start off? Does anyone like to start off with some first input on this, or
maybe I can start then. Thank you for the good introduction, and we're going to come back to many of the points later in the discussion, I'm sure. So yeah, as you say, Silke, the proposal includes a high number of delegated acts, and that's not necessarily an issue in itself, but these also contain issues that are technically very complex, and they will require a thorough discussion among stakeholders. The big challenge for industry, which I have the pleasure of representing here today, is that there's no prediction or certainty about the exact regulation framework, and nor the deadlines. So we fear a lot that we'll have deadlines very short to the actual to when we actually have to fulfill these new requirements. So shortly, that's our worry.
Yes. I don't know, maybe we would like to hear also from the Commission how they see the work moving forward on this, on those delegated acts, because there are quite a number of it, and yeah, all of them are very relevant for industry.
Yes, good morning to all of you. I'm happy to say a word on that. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here, for the introduction. I think you said all the important things of the context of this proposal. The Green Deal, product policy, circular economy action plan, but also our strategic action plan on batteries, where this comes from. To clarify this question a bit, maybe to say that this proposal, in a sense, has two parents, and I'm not talking about different Commission departments. We work on this seamlessly, but it comes out of the evaluation of the Batteries Directive, and it comes out of a study that had in mind eco-design and energy labeling for batteries, and that second part, that's the part I'm particularly familiar with. There actually we have a whole working history already for years and years and years to work on product policy through implementing and delegated acts. This has worked very well on a total of, I think, about 50 pieces of legislation, working together with all stakeholders to regulate different requirements, energy efficiency, durability of products, and in a whole stakeholder process that really works to get all the details right. To make political choices is one, but also to get all the details right. In this proposal, this is also true. There's a lot of complexity, and we need to get the details right. But at the same time, we can't do all the details here. So that's why there's a number of delegated and implementing acts. For each of them, we'll have a stakeholder process. And for most of them, we'll do an impact assessment. And we have to see case by case how exactly it works, where the expertise will come from. For example, on carbon footprint, there's already a lot of work done, whereas some others, there's still more to be done. But we're not afraid of this work. It's something we're familiar with, and we're happy to engage with all stakeholders on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if the council maybe would like to say something about this, because obviously they have to go, have to do all the work as well. How they see also in terms of timeline, how you see this moving forward. I mean, the Commission has a very ambitious timeline, 2022, and well, my personal view is it's quite ambitious, but I'm happy to hear, you know, your take on that.
Yes, thank you, Silke. From the council side, this is, of course, we agree that this is quite an ambitious timeline, and it proves exactly the complexity of the proposal. As Ewout was mentioning, it's already quite a dense and broad scope of the legislative text, but the additional work ahead of us, we are aware of the concern for all the stakeholders, and including the competent authorities and national member states, but that will have to work further also on the secondary legislation. So it is true that the deadlines and the intensity of the work ahead of us is still a concern as well for I would say for all member states, including all the stakeholders. And we'll have to see, because it's true that the original time frame as proposed by the Commission is quite ambitious, and there's a work that still needs to be done, and with both co-legislators. So we will need to come to a general approach. The Parliament will need also to vote their position, and we feel that the timelines will have to be adjusted accordingly to the time that the negotiation will take.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is something, I mean, I think, you know, basically on this battery regulation, the proposal, this is part of a puzzle. And I think we have to be aware that all these puzzles have to sort of, you know, fit in together with all the timelines that we have now on the table. The 14th of July, we will be expecting quite a lot of revisions also coming up from the Fit for 55 package. And the battery is just part of the puzzle. So it will be a challenge also for the Commission to get all these timelines somehow coordinated. And I would really welcome also from the Commission side to you know, to get those timelines. Obviously, it's not all in their power, but also depends on the Council and the Parliament. But they're all interlinked, and it gets me also to some of the issues in the battery regulation. For example, on chemical side, where we see quite an ambitious also within the battery regulation to move forward to have as less as possible chemicals, or at least also have a lot of information on the chemicals available. There's sort of a bit of well, we discussed within our working group, the environmental working, also a bit of a trade-offs, or not trade-offs, but rather, you know, we have REACH, we have the SCIP database since January. So we believe that that should be the only regulation that, or regulatory framework that should address chemicals. But we see a bit of a risk that the battery regulation might move further than currently the product legislation. So how do you, maybe the Commission can say something about this. How do you see this interaction with other product legislation on for example, chemicals? I don't know if you can say anything about that. How can we avoid overlapping and the assessment of the chemicals?
Well, there's always going to be some interaction with other legislation, but indeed, we're careful that we don't overlap in that sense, or at least minimize that kind. When it comes to hazardous chemicals, what we propose here, in fact, is comes out of the batteries directive. So it's not actually new. What is new is that we harmonize the way of assessment for this. So we actually make use of the existing system here. That's what we propose. Of an assessment by the European Chemicals Agency. So we actually, I think we're making it more harmonized than it was in the past in this case.
Yes, well, I don't know, maybe Vasilios, you could say something maybe about in terms of circularity also with the chemicals, being expert on circular economy. I don't know how do you see this this approach of addressing chemicals also within the battery regulation rather than having them only in the REACH regulation?
Yeah, that's a good question, a good topic, and I'm not sure who has the answer on this, but just let me say briefly that if we can draw some insights from other product groups, of course, this kind of complexities arising from the interference of different pieces of legislation have been observed, for example, in the electronics case, where we have seen, for example, when we talk, for example, with recyclers, they will claim that the strict requirements of the chemicals legislation sometimes put limits or administrative burdens to recycling materials that could be recycled otherwise. But I don't think that this is something that hasn't been recognized by the Commission, because now there is all of this effort to improve the interface between different pieces of legislation. I would say that it is a very complex debate because it raises questions How do we prioritize different policy goals, overreaching policy goals, for example, health and safety, and then circularity? How do you balance this objects? How do you ensure that pieces of legislation that were produced in different timelines are always have a synergetic effect, and they don't create inconsistencies? This is, I have to acknowledge, this is very difficult, but at least it has to be taken into account also in when these requirements from the Batteries Directive are taken forward. And I don't think this is something new, but something to be taken into account. And in terms of solution, yeah, conducting ex post, ex ante assessments, improving synergies between different Commission DGs, all of these things that have been discussed since some time ago, could alleviate these risks, but the risks might be there still, I have to say.
Yes, I'm just seeing here in the chat. I think Thelma, you have quite a busy schedule. So I really thank you for being here and giving some insight from the council. And I understand that you unfortunately have to leave, but I'm more than happy to continue the conversation on a future, when we ever meet again. So thank you very much. And it was very helpful to have your insight. Okay.
Thank you very much, Silke. Have a good event as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, let's move forward to the discussion on the recycling. Maybe I think this is a very good. It's a very good issue. I think we have to address as well. My feeling is a bit with the battery regulation is focusing very much on recycling, when we actually feel that recycling should rather be part of a whole. Part of the whole entire lifetime of the product. Recycling should be a tool and not an environmental goal in itself. We might be facing with some trade-off when it comes to reuse, repurposing. So I don't know how the Commission, or also Basilius, how you see this. That we have sometimes a bit of we could repurpose the battery for something else rather than recycle it, but at the same time we have very high recycling targets, so there's probably going to be a very high demand as well to recycle. So the trade-off will be how can we find a balance in reusing and recycling. I don't know if the Commission will think about how we can tackle that.
Yeah, so in the past, in the Batteries Directive, we already had quite a few provisions on recycling, and you, of course, there's quite a bit here in the new proposal. But we also have, in addition, more emphasis on repurposing, remanufacturing, etc. We've dedicated a specific article on that to give a legal framework to for these kinds of operations. So we actually want to facilitate this particular in this way.
I don't know, Vasilius, maybe you can say something about this trade-off that we have.
No, I certainly can say a few things, and maybe I will make the picture a little bit more complicated. Yeah, I mean, it is a very good question. What's going to happen to these batteries when they will reach the end of their first life? And I understand that there are certainly many uncertainties, too many uncertainties maybe. Now, I've even seen now, I realize that even the evidence that we had a few years ago about for how long these batteries will be used in the vehicles for their first life might be different now compared to a few years ago. So there's a lot of innovation, a lot of things change. So when a battery, if we can think in the future, when a battery will reach the end of the life status, there will be three different routes. Either will be disposed, hopefully not, especially because of the size and the value of materials. Then recycling and the reuse will be the two other options. Now, what will happen to these batteries will be, of course, will depend on a variety of factors. For example, the cost of recycling, which could be different in a few years' time when the cost curves will decrease. The price of key raw materials in EV batteries, of course, that will depend on many factors as well. And also whether there will be a clear business case to reuse the batteries rather than recycling them. I think that's something that we have to see how it's going to evolve in the coming years. Now, cost of new batteries will play a key role as well, because maybe in the future, new batteries will become cheaper and cheaper, and then the cost differential between new and used may decline. So it might be less attractive to reuse the batteries. And here, That was the economic perspective. Here, allow me to say that there are also many uncertainties regarding the environmental benefits of each of the options. So sometimes we think things are black and white, but it doesn't work like this. So which of these options holds more environmental benefits will depend on factors such as recycling technologies at the time and how advanced they are, the battery technologies, the amount of materials in batteries, which might decline over time, of course, the environmental impact of mining, which still involve many uncertainties. Now, it's very difficult to make a judgment which is the best option, and I would say that it requires a careful assessment, and it's not black and white. I think that the policy at this stage should provide a legal framework for all of these different options and not decide which one is the optimal option, because I don't think that anybody can say this at this stage. And of course, having an element of flexibility now, how this can take place in practice, that's a good question. To have some elements of this very complex legislative framework reconsidered in the coming years when more innovation will be coming. And we might even see more innovations that we cannot even consider at the moment. For example, all of this model, car battery ownership model might change in the future. We might have second life applications more prevalent in the market. It might be even more attractive for manufacturers to not give ownership of the batteries. We might even see leasing models for batteries, for EV batteries. So it's really unpredictable. But I would say both options should be on the table. Both options should be taken seriously, and both options should be assessed in a careful way.
Yes, yeah, but I mean, if you come to this entire, I mean, when you talk about the trade-offs, I think there's also something that we have to address is the information on what is, you know, data and all that. The Commission would like to propose also the battery passport, which is meant to have a lot of information on it. One of the key questions here is obviously who will have access to the information. That will be in the final stage, but in the beginning, where is, you know, will we have all the information necessary to reply all the questions that are needed on the sustainability, on the raw materials, where they're coming from. There's also the issue on due diligence. So there's a lot of environmental requirements ahead of us for industry. So we also have to see a bit of how we can, you know, marry basically the industrial challenge and the same time environmental challenge, because this is obviously going to be very costly. I don't know, maybe Amelia, from industry point of view, maybe you can say something about the biggest challenges for the development of batteries in Europe, as we also have a lot of input also from China. China is basically the leader in batteries. So how can we make the industry in Europe competitive?
Yeah, sorry, thank you for that question. I feel like I sound very pessimistic when I talk about the challenges, and I just want to emphasize first that we are very positive about this regulation. It's the basis for the electrification of European society. So it's obviously very important. I just want to, if I may, go back to Vasileios' point that technological development, that's something we'll see constantly, and that's why it's very important with a level playing field, but it's also very important to have the possibility to innovate. We, as my company 3M, is a supplier, so we see the different trends globally and in Europe, and we see that just a few years ago, there were sort of a line of where a company would need a certain spare part. That would take 5 years. Now it takes 6 to 8 months. So that's how fast it goes. And going back to recycling and reusability, thank you for saying that, both of you. It's of course we should focus on reuse before recycling, even though recycling is of course important because of the materials. But otherwise, to make the battery sector grow in Europe, it's of course here important to look at the end customers. They're not the customers of my company, because we are a supplier to the car industry and to other industries, but they are the end users, and representing industry today, it's really important to say that the customers, the end users of EV vehicles, are the most important ones. So we have to think about nudging and push factors. And here we need citizens to see the logic of taking part of that electrification of society. Of course, they have certain demands for environmental factors. They don't want their cars, their new EV vehicles to do harm, neither their electronic devices. They want them to be preferably carbon neutral, right? But they also have to be integrated into the electrification of society, and EV vehicles have to be affordable. We need proper infrastructure, and we need a grid and energy grid that works with green energy sources. And all that has to happen simultaneously. And that's, of course, as you said, Silke, previously, for you, Evert, that's a huge challenge because it all has to happen at the same time. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it's another question that will be still in the future on the table, I think.
So many questions, yeah. So many answers.
Well, maybe,
I can add something here, if you do.
Yeah, please go.
Can I go? Okay, good, thank
you.
Yes. I think Emilia said that's a very good challenge. There will be a need for so many different information flows. There will be an information flow for them, then information flow for their customers, then a different information flow for the consumer who buys the actual vehicle. And all of these different kind of segments of actors will need to be reassured about these batteries. And of course, here there will be a challenge of how do you ensure that all of these information flows are consistent? They don't create an overly huge administrative burden. They are technically consistent, and I guess if we had somebody here on the panel who develops such tools, could actually could easily say, because I know some of these organizations, that these information flows can be complex, and having a very large number of requirements can create additional challenges. So certainly, this is something that needs to be taken into account by the Commission. I think that any kind of tool of this kind needs to involve the whole supply chain and all actors. And I know this because we are SEPS is part of an EU-funded project named Circ for Life, who aims to develop a traceability tool on electronics. And we don't have the manufacturers on board, and we see that we miss a key link in the picture. And I should also say that there's a lot of innovation in this field already happening, sometimes by different industry actors. I don't need to say names, but I've seen, for example, blockchain tools being developed that try to create traceability for cobalt, for example. So many industries are already stepping forward to develop this kind of traceability approaches. So this needs to be taken into account in order to have a multitude of different tools in the market, and then different requirements by the Commission, something to be considered as well.
Yes, yeah. There's one point which I thought was very interesting about what you said, Emilia, on the sort of an ecosystem on batteries, where you basically have the battery being part of the energy grid rather than being just part of the vehicle. That would be interesting to see also from the Commission how you're going to, how are you going to address this? Because I mean, the whole energy grid issue is part of, DG Energy, and I've been to some conferences of them, and they have quite a romantic view when it comes to also to access to data, that we can just open up all the data on availability of what is on, for example, durability of the battery. I think this is something that will be, we'll have to address in the future. And also the thing about if the battery is part of the energy grid, what will this mean for durability? Obviously, if you charge and recharge and decharge the battery continuously, this is going to be the battery is going to be affected by it. It's also about consumers who are willing to do this. Are they happy to being part of the energy grid or not? Also in terms of taxation. So this will be quite a big piece. And I understand that this is sort of the idea from DG Energy to do this like that, which is obviously very nice, but there are sort of a lot of questions still that will have to be tackled on this. I don't know if the Commission or if what you have some views on that, or if there has been already some discussions on that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the future. Data, information, interaction between different things. This is the future, and that's why we, in this piece of legislation, it's also an enabler for that. In particular, what we propose on the battery management system, that in principle there should be access to certain actors to certain pieces of information of the battery management system. So, and we've actually specifically referred also to independent aggregators of the energy sector. So that's an enabler that we've put in this piece of legislation. Many of the other things you said, I don't think we can address specifically here in this piece of legislation when we talk about the manufacture and the end of life of batteries. But that's certainly one important aspect to enable such future developments. The other thing is the battery passport, of course, and it's very much linked also with the battery management system. Here, this is the future data, and we're talking about an innovative sector indeed. So it's difficult to write legislation for that, but it's not impossible. We've done it before. For example, televisions is also a very innovative sector that's been regulated already for years. But we also want to foster innovation here, and I think the battery passport is particularly one there. We're in the context of the broader product policy. We have the Sustainable Products Initiative coming, where we're also thinking about product passports and what would they do. Here, it was important that we go ahead with this now. In particular, in this case, what we propose for battery passport is not yet something that would be covering the entire supply chain. I think that may have been too ambitious at this stage, but batteries in particular is important because the performance changes over the lifetime. So basically, our product passport here is a digital twin from which the right actors can harvest the right data and helps them further in all these things, in the future energy market, in repurposing or remanufacturing batteries, but also the manufacturers themselves to innovate further, to have more data to follow up on all these things. So they're not. I don't have all the answers to all your questions, but I think we have an important enabler here.
Yes, at the same time, there's a very risky pathway as well to do, because I mean, we all say data is the new oil. Giving access to the BMS or the battery management system is not always welcomed by all OEMs, because there's quite a lot of information in there that it should not be read by everybody. So there's also competitive, risk that we have to not only for Europe but also for OEMs. We have to protect. So yeah, this was something that we have to discuss also in the future. But at the same time, we need the information also for the end of life phase, when we have to recycle and I have to know about the chemicals. So there's quite a challenge. So I don't know how, if you maybe from industry as well, how do you see that, how we can address this, or is there any some kind of solution already to this information flow? Is this something that has to be streamlined per sector, has to be streamlined per on data, or I don't know if there's any ideas on that? It would be interesting to hear.
Well, all I can say is that there's a huge discussion going on for different battery groups and for different applications, and kickstarted by the regulation, basically, because as an industry, we understand and we know that data is sort of, it's very important, and of course it has to be shared. But there's a big worry that the battery itself, because it contains all information, like every trade industrial secret in that individual battery, that third parties that are not authorized would gain access to that. So that's a huge also hindrance for the development of new technologies, if we fear that it's not so much for my company, but more for sort of the broader industry. If all that information is shared, then how can we develop something new? Because as you will know, coming from TT Grow and from CPS, of course, that if you want to develop something, you also want that trade secret to be protected, but shared as well to some extent. The important things that have to be shared, of course. Then I also want to go back to something you talked about previously, Silke, on durability, especially for EV vehicles. We appreciate a lot the Commission's work in UNECA to create a level playing field for durability. We know there's new regulation coming up, and of course also on safety. And I know that there are people on the call from the US mission, and we appreciate the common, this place where that can be discussed. Having a level playing field globally on these issues is very important for the industry. Because even though we want to create that European power base for batteries, that said that previously, more advanced in China, and they are part of those discussions. So we also need to sort of have that level playing fields for certain spare parts and so on. So thank you, especially to you, Evert, for that work. It's very important. And also, sorry if I may add to that, there's some overlap in the regulation, or at least discussion about overlap with UNECA. I think it's Article 10, but I'm sure I know that the discussions within DG Grow are that that has its place in UNECA. So.
Silke, can also add a few words here.
I don't know if it was used, but because also for recycling, I said maybe data is obviously very important. Maybe you can add something on that.
Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, I think the important thing is to know what is the battery passport used for. I mean, what is the purpose of the battery passport? Do we need it for durability requirements? Do we need for the recycling, the data that are required for recycling? Do we need it for due diligence, to justify where the raw material is coming from? I think that's very important to start in the beginning, to have this kind of framework to see exactly what is the use of the battery passport. We cannot cover everything, I think, and that will be the biggest challenge. As much as I think we welcome also the environmental goal to have a battery that is as clean as possible, but again, it's going to be very challenging, and we also have to see how industry will be able to deliver all this, especially when it comes to data. And yeah. I also would like to flag now, if for the audience, if they would like to have start some questions in the chat, they're more than welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just start by maybe a little bit broadening the question or broadening the issue of transparency, I would say if you look into the circular economy literature, research, and different value chains, lack of transparency across value chains, or if I turn this around, the need to have transparency across value chains is one of the key enablers of the circular economy. So you cannot get around it. Something needs to happen in this domain. And we already see big issues in electronics, for example, and that was also the topic of the project I mentioned before, Cycle for Life, where we see that we speak with recyclers, for example, and they claim that sometimes they don't know how to recycle specifically a piece of electronics because they're not sure about the materials included there or of the hazardous substances. So this, I think, brings on the table two information flows that are important from a circular economy point of view. Now, how complicated is to have this information and make sure that everyone shares this information? That's a good question. I would say that these are two key pieces of information will be needed. Now, the responsible sourcing, and especially taking into account that sometimes the information on the working conditions in mines, according to some reports that I've seen from NGOs, is not so clear. I guess that's something else that is needed. There are some certification schemes, and I'm not sure how they can cover this gap. And then, of course, the environmental impacts across various different stages of life cycle. That's of batteries in the future. That's another key piece of information. But I understand that there will be many uncertainties here as well. So I don't know if we should make a hierarchy of options. But here I point out some of the issues that we see in our research that they pop up as very important. And I would say that I think this is a good time to start initiating this discussion. And I think it is a good time that the Commission include this in a piece of legislation as a proposal. And now there will be a lot of there will be more studies, there will be more initiatives, even without having the regulatory requirements in place. And I think it's needed. Now, how this battery passport will look like, can this be used for different product groups? These are questions that they are very complex, and there will be, I know that doesn't make the life of the industry easier, but there will be a learning curve. There will be things that we know now or things that we don't know now, and we will know in a few years from time. And I think this is a debate that we will be having for some time. On the 10th of June, by the way, we organize an event on traceability across value chains, focusing on electronics. I don't know if we will have the answers as well, but we will try to dive into these issues. So to wrap it up, traceability is key. You cannot you cannot leave it on the side, but certainly bring some fun. And this will be certainly an ongoing debate for the coming years.
Maybe from Ewart, from Commission, you can add something on how you see the battery passport moving forward. I mean, obviously data it's going to be very complex, and especially on the access to data and who will have access to the different levels of data.
Yeah, I already said that we're also thinking about product passports more in general for different types of product groups. There we may come to some different conclusions on how we will use that in future. Here for batteries, basically what at this stage what we think was possible and useful is two things for this passport. One, that it just gives all the information that the manufacturer of the battery has to provide anyway. So information on the total carbon footprint of the battery, etc. So fixed information. And then, most importantly, in addition to that, the dynamic information on how the battery in terms of performance changes during its life. And that's indeed, I understand, is information that is not to share with everyone. And also there for the battery passport, we've indicated that in specific secondary legislation, we will then detail, give the rules on the access to that information. And what's important also is that this isn't envisaged as a central system where things are stored. It's this passport is envisaged as something that's still the information is still with the manufacturer, and then but there are electronic systems that allow to share this with the type of information with the right actors. So that's the way we look at it. I think in a general sense, I think we have addressed some of your concerns, but possibly we need to go into more on the specifics when we go and negotiate the regulation further to see what more or what in addition would need to be done.
I can have a whole panel discussion on this, on the access to data, but yeah, the thing is also in terms of industrial policy, how do you align with the Battery Alliance? Is this something that is actively, I mean, the battery passport is something that's being discussed, I think, also in the Battery Alliance. I mean, there's probably a lot of input also from stakeholders there. Is this something that's being actively been with DG2Go and DG Environment? Are you coordinating this with the Battery Alliance? How do you see also the fact that we have so high, environmental requirements for in the future for the battery, how we can stay competitive on the global market? Another thing is we have also within the Battery Alliance, this is very focused on Europe. Is there anything also open for non-European companies, or I don't know if you know anything about this actually, if you can answer
that. As far as I know, there are two battery alliances. So we have the European Battery Alliance, and already set up, running, and been also a catalyst for change, for investment. And there we're not as I mean, that's not a place to specifically deal with product passports, because we're doing it here in the discussion on the regulation. But there's also the Global Battery Alliance. And I know that this passport is actually one of the things they're particularly looking at. So certainly we're in touch with them. As I said, what we're doing here is defining the legal framework for our product, our battery passport. But it will still leave sort of flexibility on how it's then implemented in practice. So I think the work of the Global Battery Alliance will be one piece of useful work there, in addition to anything else that it might be.
And if I may add to that, we are actually, as 3M, we're actually members of the European Battery Alliance. It's a very open forum where lots of things are being discussed very openly, flat structure. It's also a good place. And I want to thank the Commission for setting that up, actually. A good place for different stakeholders to meet each other to create that European angle on things. And then the other battery platform, I know a little bit through an association that focuses only on that. So associations can also join. And yeah, it's very transparent, open, also for US industry to answer your question, Henry Baker, I think.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, we've been discussing now quite a lot of on data and all that. There within our working group, there was quite some discussion also on removability, replaceability of the battery. There are some ideas also flying around. I know I've heard about it, of having a standard battery and do some battery swapping. But when it comes to battery replaceability, for example, for small appliances, this is not so much on electric vehicles, but household appliances and all that. How do you see I mean, there seems to be some kind of idea that they're easily replaceable, but is this something that you want to pursue? Do you think this is also from, from an academic point of view, Vasilius, maybe you can say something about it. Is this something that is, will actually good for the environment, or will we have problems now in the future with non-professionals trying to do some battery swapping or battery replacing? I think we have to be, taking into account always the industry specification of all technical requirements to do this. So I know it also in the parliament there are some ideas that everything repairing should be done by everybody, but we see there a bit of a problem that this might hinder actual professional work on that, some qualified work. I don't know if the Commission sees this as well. Is this something that you rather see more for professional, qualified, or accessed by only by professional, or do you see this something as being open for everybody?
So when we're talking about electric vehicle batteries or energy storage batteries, what we proposed is to give quite a bit of detail to professionals on for dismantling, possibly repairing, etc., etc. Separately, but completely separately, we've proposed that for so-called portable batteries, so and all the things that are not electric vehicle or energy storage, roughly, not industrial batteries. There, we've gone a step further than in the past. In the past, batteries had to be simply removable. So with a view particularly of the end of life of batteries. We've gone a step further to that they should also be replaceable. And but we're not talking about industrial batteries or electric vehicle batteries here. So that's I think we need to make that distinction clear.
Yeah. I mean, there were, I guess, I hear some chats here. I mean, Leah, I think you had a question as well. I'm happy to give you the floor if you want. Like,
I just to jump back into the Battery Alliance IPCI. I'm just wondering, I mean, this regulation is product policy, but it fits into the open strategic autonomy discussion. And how do you ensure, especially with where we started the conversation this morning, which was around, we are entering a year-long debate on delegated acts. How are you talking to the industrialists who are potentially considering bringing manufacturing back or scaling to another level in terms of battery manufacturing in Europe, so that this part of the chain happens, locally, with the, absolutely impressive level of ambition in this regulation, with a number of things that are still uncertain. So is this discussion happening with your colleagues from the industrial policy unit? Are you in discussion with some of the industrialists who've put forward an IPCI on batteries manufacturing? I'd be really curious for your thoughts on this.
I'm not sure whether I fully understood what you said, because in this, we're talking about industrial policy or investments. In fact, everything's already been set in motion some years ago, and I mean, coming to fruition now or in the next years. What was missing is the regulatory framework, a clear regulatory framework, and that's what we've come up now in consultation with all the colleagues. It may seem like a little overwhelming as regulatory framework, but it fits in quite a good tradition on product policy that we have, and we think it also actually gives a clear direction for future development, and help. I would say it helps the industry in the next steps. But happy to hear from all of you.
I think we can say that it's good to have a framework, but there's a lot of question marks within the framework. So it's yeah. I think that, Leah, maybe that's what you meant as well. We have, especially with the delegated acts. We don't know, and I mean, this is not in your power. We obviously don't know how this will develop in the council and in the parliament. But this is, this is the game we always play in Europe, unfortunately. So there's a lot of uncertainties, and the thing is, it's a very dynamic industry. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in R&D. We have to move forward. As I said all in the beginning, it's part of the puzzle. So we have now 14th of July, a lot of new proposal for CO2 legislation, also for cars. Next year for trucks. I mean, all of these will have to be considered when looking at the battery regulation. And coming to replaceability, I think Vasilius, you wanted to say something. Just acoustically, I think you was, I didn't hear you, so sorry for that. But
no
I think
problem.
you wanted to say something on that.
Yeah, no problem. So on replaceability, you mean in general about batteries, not electric vehicle batteries?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Portable batteries.
Okay.
Rather.
No, I mean, this maybe I can draw some insights from the electronic sector. I don't know if it will be the same evolution for electric vehicle batteries. I mean, if we will be having many independent repair shops in the future, more, who knows? But of course, it's very different type of, the size plays a big role here. And for mobile phones or consumer electronics in general, we see many small independent repair shops. I think you see them everywhere. And here there is a debate because not all of these are certified by the manufacturers, and of course the manufacturers would prefer to give certifications to the repair centers that they feel that they do a job according to their standards. But then the other side of the picture is that the repair centers that don't have this certification, they cannot use high quality, high-end components, replacement components, and they rely on other components imported sometimes of lower quality that can have an impact on the lifespan of the device. So I think that shows that there are pros and cons and different options, and I'm curious to see how this evolution, how these things will develop on batteries for electric vehicles as well, because there will be points where a battery will need to be sometimes repaired, And whether this will happen, this will take place through independent repair shops or by the producers who will retain ownership, or any other actor we cannot foresee at this stage. I don't know, but I think these are issues and that need to already be taken into account, because we already have lessons for different product groups in electronics. So we don't need to wait to see how the whole market will evolve to at least put some general framework rules in place. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think there's Luca Belli who also wanted to say something on that.
Yeah.
Happy to the floor. Yeah.
Thanks, Silke. So it's Luca Belli from Procter & Gamble. So we also have devices and with portable batteries in our portfolio, like electric toothbrushes or razors. So that's so on the point of replaceability, indeed. So the replaceability obligation is in there in the proposal, but we need to make sure that this is safe. And so we have this is our main point, and this is about wet use appliances. So toothbrushes that you use underwater. So for us, it's okay to have this replaceability, but it should be independent operators which are professionally qualified. So it would be operator professionally qualified, because after you replace the batteries, they need to make also a test to make sure that this is watertight. Because if you have water going into lithium-ion batteries, this could have safety risks for consumers. So I think this is key. Replaceability, yes, but it should not at the expense of safety. And all these wet use appliances are also regulated through standards where there is also a need to them to be watertight. So I think that we would need some more specification on safety and on how these independent operators would have to also do some watertightness tests. So that would be my suggestion on this. And then the second one is also the timing, because that provision would apply as of January 2022. So now we know that maybe it would be a bit later, but in some cases you need also some design changes to make sure that the replacement is safe. So I think that an extending transition timeline, a realistic one, would be useful to make sure that these appliances are, when they need to be redesigned in a way that they can be safely replaceable. So thanks.
I don't know if anybody wants to react on that, maybe, or from the Commission, maybe. There's one thing I wanted to also address. I mean, the one thing that we have been discussing on the battery passport is obviously about traceability. And there's one issue that also we have been discussing is about the EPR, the extended producer responsibility. The thing is, obviously, if the battery is completely traceable, I think the idea to have some kind of QR code on it as well. Where the question that we have raised is how long is the responsibility will last of the first year, or from the first party. So when we will put a battery on the market, how will this be? The responsibility, will this be until really the end of life, or will it stop when it's being reused? I don't know if you can say anything about that, maybe. Also from terms of traceability, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Will there be any changes, or how the battery will be reused and all that? So do you see this something as a discussion point for the future or not?
I think what you raise is a good point,
Yeah.
certainly in relation to the battery passport. What happens with the battery passport in case of remanufacture, or at the end of life, or in case of reuse, etc., etc. Because, as I said, we don't envisage something like a central battery passport. We envisage something, the data would be still in the hands of manufacturers. So I think this is a good point that we need to further look into with our colleagues in Council and Parliament on this point specifically.
Yeah, I'm just thinking very practically. I mean, obviously, if these vehicles will be, even be sold to third countries, not European, the OEMs will be responsible to take back the batteries and ship them from I don't know where back to Europe. I think there was some kind of in a parliament discussion on that once, that we have to ship all the raw material back to Europe, and I thought, well, maybe it's more intelligent to set up a recycling industry in those third countries rather than shipping everything back. But this is, I don't know if in terms of recyclability and raw material from an academic point of view, Vasilis, maybe you can say if you know anything about it, if we have to take them back in to actually get all the raw materials back to Europe, if this will be necessary, or are there any numbers on that? That would be like, interesting to hear as well.
Yeah, I mean, very, very good questions. And on the one hand, we really want to have a recycling industry and a full value chain in Europe. On the other hand, there are these kind of questions, of what is going to happen. The batteries are going to be exported because we will still be having global value chains. Obviously, even if we develop a very thriving industry in Europe, some batteries will be exported. We will be having a global market. We're not going to close the borders to the batteries, obviously. I don't know if I have data and if I can draw on what happens to electronics, but of course, on what happens currently with electronic waste, which can give a good example. But I think when it comes to the development of extended producer responsibility schemes, which, something to be looked into, what happens, how are producers of electronics responsible for e-waste that is exported outside Europe? That's something good to be looked into. Maybe it can be taken as an example for the batteries case as well. But I would say that at least for electronics, one thing that we have seen is that there have been a multitude of different EPR schemes in Europe, especially for electronics. For example, having some countries having very rigid approaches by having one scheme controlling all of the different flows of and stocks of devices. And in other cases, we have completely, I don't need to name the countries, but it's very, you can find this in research. We have very open in competition approaches where there are many different schemes and they compete, and then everything is on price. And what we heard from some recyclers is they cannot invest because they always compete on price and they cannot, and that gives very little room for investment. So I would say that, and I haven't seen in detail the proposal on EPR in the Batteries Directive, but that risk, especially for such product that might be very valuable in the future in terms of resources and materials, that risk should be minimized of having very inconsistent approaches across the EU. So that I would say that's my take on it, and I welcome also the provision to have modulated fees in EPR scheme. That's something I saw in the proposal. I think that's something that is being discussed a lot in the circular economy debate. That the fees that producers pay for the amount for the device that they put in the market should be modulated according to certain characteristics rather than having such fees based away.
I don't know, maybe Emilia, you want to say something on this as well?
Yeah, so very shortly, I think, but I think everybody did that on this call already, but it's very important to distinguish in between EV vehicle batteries and portable batteries. And here, especially for portable batteries, as far as we can see, there's the biggest risk because they're small. You can have a device that will never sort of leave your drawer after you use it. And here it's probably important to look at what is actually on the market for recollection. A bit going back to your point, Silke, will it end up on my travels to Japan, or will it come back, or what will happen? So we've discussed it internally in AmCham, and probably the best solution is to inform consumers that it's there's a cost for recyclability, and for the consumer then to know that they are paying for that price as well, or the manufacturer is paying for that price. So that sort of information, because as you said, Vasilios, there's different models all over Europe for deposit schemes. We've seen that more on other kinds of products, and they're very different, and sometimes they don't work in sync, which makes it very tricky for the consumer.
There is still quite some time. There's still some time for some questions. So if anybody from the audience has some questions, I'm happy to take them. Somebody can also raise. I mean, I don't have that many questions in the chat. So if somebody would like to take the floor, I don't see any hands raised. That means everything was very clear. That's very good. I know. Well, I don't know if you want to say anything or some closing remarks as well on this. That would be, we can always go to that as well. For maybe a question, what will be the biggest for the Commission, maybe on the timeline? Also, how do you see 2022 target that you set feasible? And the biggest challenges maybe you had now during the discussion with Council and the Parliament?
Yeah, I'll say something on that and a bit more. On the timeline, we wanted to be ambitious because all the important developments on batteries are happening now or in the coming years. So that's why you see an ambitious proposal in terms of timeline. We're very glad that in the Council, the Portuguese presidency has taken up also an ambitious negotiation schedule. At the same time, it is a long proposal. It will take some time. At least we also know from the Parliament that normally they should be ready with their work in February next year. So on the basis of that, hopefully at some point next year, we have a clear picture of what is going to be required by when, and also a clear timetable then for the Commission on how to work further on the different parts that need further implementation. And I wanted to say a few words still on that, because I from several interventions I understood that this was a key issue, that even once the regulation is agreed, there's still a lot of work to come. Uncertainties you mentioned. I just want to, if you as organizations or companies or others are not familiar with what the work the Commission does on the eco-design, I would encourage you to talk to others who've already work in a sector that has been regulated, and how the stakeholder processes work there. Because I've worked on this in the past, and it's a very good stakeholder process. All stakeholders are happy with quite a lot of interaction, discussion on details. So I really want to reassure you by talking to others that this is possible in a good way, and I'm confident that we will get this done. The whole regulations at some point next year, and then the implementing parts, of course, soon to follow. Don't know whether I'm going to say any further words after this, but otherwise I'll already thank you very much for inviting me and letting me take part in this.
Vasilius, maybe you want to say something?
As concluding remarks, I guess.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, very briefly, I would say that you mentioned in the beginning, Silke, you started your contribution by highlighting the complexity of the regulation. And yesterday, I was having a look at the different position papers for this piece of regulation. And I mean, I haven't seen any other piece of legislation having so many different position papers and so long position papers. Everything looks like a research paper these days. So I would say that this highlights the complexity, but from a research point of view, there has been really demand for a framework on batteries since a long time ago. And already for many years, we have been hearing from stakeholders, so we need really a good framework for electric vehicle batteries. The picture is changing. We don't have this framework. So certainly, I understand all of the different concerns about the complexity and the different delegated acts. But at the same time, there was really a need for some action since quite some time ago. So I would say that I fully understand that it's not going to be an easy way going around all of these different requirements in the coming years. But at least the debate has been initiated in many areas, and Europe is perhaps ahead in this discussion in many, let's say, different areas. We already discussed about difficult, complex issues that of technical nature, of issues that even scientists will not really agree at this stage. But I think this is a good way forward. Now, now we covered a lot of the uncertainties. There are more. Maybe we can have other discussions in the future. But certainly, I would say that the ambition is there. And if you have, of course, an ambitious piece of proposal, that will raise, it's natural to have concerns, doubts, and some of these things will be resolved in the coming years. For other things, there will be more research and more evidence coming that will shed light on what is the optimal
Emilia, you want to have a final word as well, maybe?
Yeah, well, I'll avoid saying what Vasileios and Evert already said. I agree with many of the things. Maybe I'd like to go to the Commission's explanatory memorandum of the battery regulation, which I agree very much with. The battery development and production are strategic imperatives for Europe. And I want to add, it's also important for the rest of the world, because this will spill over, as we've seen with many other pieces of legislation. I also want to point to the fact that even though there's a lot of complexity and it's a very important regulation, seen from a broader perspective, we can only reap the benefits of a final batteries regulation, whatever it's going to look like in a bit more than a year, if products live up to consumers' expectations, so that they buy these products instead of more carbon intensive alternatives. And I think we have to keep that in mind all the time. They also have to be affordable, obviously, and then the consumers have to understand that whole picture of becoming prosumers. And for that, we need safe and reliable energy to our citizens, and think about the power quality issues. So thanks a lot for this debate. I'm sure there'll be many more. And yeah.
Okay, well, I would like to thank you all of you as well. It was very, I think, very constructive discussion, and I think we can all agree that this is a very complex regulation, and I hope we can, also in the future continue this exchange to move forward, because industry would like to move forward, but it has to be of course industry friendly and implementable. So we are happy to continue this exchange also with the academics, because they have a lot of insight as well. So I'm giving the floor back to Leah to give the final words.
All right, well, thanks very much to Silke and to our panelists for a really dynamic discussion. I can't tell you, I think all of us are suffering from Zoom fatigue. This was really fun in an environment where we're used to having more passive conversations. So thanks to the panelists, thanks to Silke, thanks to the people who asked questions. I'm going to take these, our discussion to maybe a little bit more of a philosophical level to wrap things up and give us more things to mull over. But as in all discussions around the Green Deal, we're trying to make sense of an environment we're moving into where the only constant is going to be change. And our conversation really brought this. So we're going to deal with business models we can only begin to foresee. We're going to be dealing with customer expectations that are changing. We're going to be dealing with, the role of data and what is proprietary and what does transparency mean in the context of new business models. And in a way, it's testimony to the Commission's understanding that the battery regulation is so complex because it realizes how many moving pieces there are going forward. And I think if we could, as we enter into a long legislative phase, and then a probably longer secondary legislation phase in the years to come, really think about, are we arriving at the right model, which sets a framework in which the economy can grow in terms of what it is that the end consumer, as Emilia was saying, but also just society and industry can play their role when it comes to the energy transition, and how do we meet the challenges ahead of us. So that means, how do you set an environment that's conducive to innovation and the massive investments that are needed, and yet do so in a way that allows for proprietary information, because otherwise, why invest in innovation if you can't reap the benefits from it? All of these questions are starting to be asked in the batteries regulation in a way I think that's going to have very far-reaching consequences going forward. And the only way to chart that course is to continue having conversations like the ones we had this morning. So with that, I thank everybody. I learned a lot from today's discussion. I hope you did too. And watch this space. We'll be in touch with further discussions soon. Thanks again to everybody.